Hey everyone, it's Katie, and today I'm going to be sharing with you my tarot deck collection. That is every single tarot deck that I own that is currently in my possession, apart from a couple that are still sitting on my couch that are waiting to be shipped off to their new owners. These are all the decks that are mine, that I own, and there's quite a number, so I think this video is going to be pretty long, so I hope you stick with me. And enjoy. I just wanted to say that this is in no particular order, but there is a mix of in-print and out-of-print decks, as well as mass-produced and indie decks. I have done reviews or unboxings on quite a number of these decks, so if you want to see if I've spoken more about these decks, you can go to my channel page and type in the little search bar there, just type in the name of the deck, and if I've made a video on that, it will pop up. But I won't ramble on too much, we'll get going. This is not all of the decks, so there are plenty more than this to share with you. So I think this will be fun, both just, you know, you guys often ask what decks I've got going on and all of that, but also just for my own personal record, kind of, I enjoy making these videos and looking back on them at the end of each year. So this is all of the decks that I own as of, what is the date? The 21st of December 2018. Enjoy. Okay, so these are in no particular order, but the first one we're going to look at is the Clover Tarot. Now this box is a little beat up, but that's okay because I keep the deck in this cute little pouch that I have. And this deck is so beautiful. The backing is just like a simple but very pretty 3-leaf clover. And this lovely deck was actually a gift from the one and only Veronica Jude. And this is a deck I'd been looking for, or had on my list on and off for a very long time. But I don't know, it was just one that I never ended up pulling the trigger on for myself and purchasing. So it was just a delight. It was such a special moment to receive this from someone that I've always really respected and admired in the community. And cards like this are just, I don't know, so stunning. It's pretty traditional Rider-Waite-Smith, just done with beautiful colours, and it ultimately just in a really, really beautiful way. I think it's a very pretty deck. And I do think in large part that is the attraction for me is in the colours. The next is an old favourite of mine, and this one is out of print. But I've had it, I bought it actually when it still was in print, and it is the Stella's Tarot. My copy is trimmed, which makes it very, very small. It's more of a pocket deck these days, and I just adore it. I love it so much. I remember when I did a review of this deck, and this was when it was still in print, people just didn't seem very impressed by it. But I don't know, I feel like it's got a bit of traction since then, and I just think it's so beautiful, and I just love it. I love the colours. Colours is definitely a theme for me. It's an important part of, I guess, how I experience the deck and the emotions that the images pull up for me. But also I just think it's kind of really adorable, and I've spoken on and quite a lot actually about how this deck for me is just a really fun one to work with. It just makes me laugh. Most of the imagery, at least the meanings, are pretty traditional. But cards like this are a little bit different, and I do love it. This is a deck I've had for several years now and remains one of my absolute favourites. Such a sweet little deck. It's another one of my old favourites. This is the Circo Tarot. Now this deck kind of goes in and out of print. I don't remember which edition I have. I have a feeling it was like the 3rd or something, or maybe the 2nd. I backed it on Kickstarter a few years ago. I think the current edition has a blue backing. I have done a review of this deck as well. And I think this is one of those decks that's just a good, fun, easy reader. It's really colourful, but I do think like this 5 of Pentacles, I think these sort of like, they're just really effective and easy to read. That's been my experience with this deck. It's one that I read for clients quite a lot, just because it was one of those ones that, I mean, it photographs beautifully, people like it, but also it's a really clear reader. Just speaks very, very clearly to me, which is always nice. Especially when you're reading for someone else. It's a little bit weird, a little bit quirky, but also just really easy to read and accessible, I think. Next up we have an Old Faithful. It's the Centennial edition of the Rider-Waite-Smith. I have a couple of different editions of the Rider-Waite-Smith. This is probably one of my most used. It was kind of the first one that I fell in love with. I won't go through it too much. It's just a really nice copy of the classic Rider-Waite-Smith that kind of really toned down a lot of the harshness of some of the more modern yellow boxes. Some people would argue too much, kind of like this fake aged thing. And I can appreciate that, but I don't know, I just also find it quite charming, I suppose, and the cardstock's lovely and thick, and just, it's just a really nice edition, I think. I do have two other editions of the Rider-Waite-Smith. I have my yellow box that's kind of, it's not like a pre-copyright or anything like that, but it is old enough to have nicer cardstock. And then this one is the UK purple box, I think is what they kind of call it. This is not an expensive deck to get. It is out of print, but you know, it's not rare like some of the other blue boxes are. But I think it's a really, really nice edition of the deck. I love the lines a lot finer, the colours are a little bit softer, the cardstock's lovely. Like, as far as value for money, but the older decks and the nicer editions, I think this one, you can't really go wrong with this one. I've done videos talking about all my different editions and stuff, but I'm pretty comfortable with the ones that I have now, just because I love this one and my Centennial so much. They're kind of the ones that I use, but I think this one would be my favourite. Up next we have another deck that was a gift actually, and it is the Dreaming Way Tarot, and this came from another Veronica, a Veronica that used to have very pink hair. I wouldn't say that I feel particularly connected with this deck yet. I've only done a couple of readings and they've all been very small. But I really, really like the imagery, and I've been drawn to it for a few years now. And again, it was just one of those ones that I never bought for myself. So it was lovely when Veronica sent it to me. I just love the imagery. It kind of feels very storybook, almost Alice in Wonderland-y sometimes. And I say that as someone who doesn't know Alice in Wonderland very well. Almost has a bit of an anime feel sometimes too. It's very interesting. I don't quite know how to, I'm not sure that it exactly fits super easily in a single box, although it certainly is a very Rider-Waite-Smith based deck. It's just a very pretty and quirky and fun sort of a one. Next we have one of my favourite tarot decks. It's a deck I'd wanted for such a long time, but was out of print. It does come in a little tin actually, but this is the Minute Tarot. It's just a Rider-Waite-Smith clone, but each of the images was drawn in a 5-minute time limit. And there's just something really, really charming and fun about that. I love these colours. I love how the borders even reflect or kind of add to the meaning or the feeling of the card. I love a lot of these faces. A lot of them have very funny facial hair that just gives me a bit of a chuckle. But a lot of them too are just really pretty, like this one. I certainly couldn't do that in 5 minutes. I think the idea, the concept behind this in and of itself is an interesting one. I feel like that the intention of this deck really feeds into how I experience it and read with it. And I enjoy the aesthetics of it. I think it's adorable. But perhaps that's why it's found a place into my heart, is because I am one of those people that can overthink things and get caught up in my head. And this deck kind of helps free me from that a little bit, just in its simplicity. Next we have a deck that actually feels very similar in terms of the cardstock, and it is the Tarot of the Crone by Ellen Lorenzi Prince, who is also the creator of the Dark Goddess Tarot, which I did have for a little while but didn't really connect with. I much, much prefer this deck, the Tarot of the Crone. I think the best word I can think of to describe this deck is potent. There's a real intensity about these cards, and there's a very good example. I think it's just really, really powerful. It's very not traditional in a lot of ways, but it's a very, very intuitive deck and a really, really profound and powerful one. The cards like this are just mesmerizing. There's so much just so much power in an image like this. It's so simple, and it just kind of lets these archetypes speak for themselves. And they do, they feel ancient and primal, which I think is just a really, really cool thing. I think it's just been done really, really well. Next we have another deck that I've done a review on, I've spoken about a lot, and it is the good old Anak. I have done a pretty extensive review on this, and a lot of the kind of therapeutic tarot stuff that I've shared with you guys has been using this deck, just because I think it's just a really easy deck to work with. The images really speak for themselves, and that was kind of the whole point of the deck, was that you didn't have to be clued in, you didn't have to be up to date and in the know with all the occult symbolism and all the esoteric language of the cards. You didn't have to be up on that. You could just look at the card and describe what you saw, and that was enough to get you working with those traditional meanings still. And I love that. I love that. That's why I think this deck is a brilliant one to learn with. It definitely helps me a lot, especially with the aces and the court cards. I suppose you look at this and you see and you feel what this character is seeing and feeling. So in that way, it's just really easy to access the thoughts and emotions that, you know, kind of the cards might bring up for you, which I think is what this deck does really well. I know not everybody loves the artwork. I actually quite enjoy it. I think the colours are fun, but yellow is my favourite colour, which is a very predominant colour in this deck, but it's a total classic as far as I'm concerned. And my final deck in a pouch that lives in a pouch is this little deck that is actually another one that I've trimmed, and was a standard size but is now much more of a pocket size, I suppose, and is the deck that I tend to, more often than not, if I'm going to take a deck just with me in my bag. It's basically a Rider-Waite-Smith, but just redrawn, essentially. And I just really like the drawings and the colours especially. I just think it's a really nice little deck. And I got it for a bargain, and I didn't really like the borders, so I trimmed them off and edged it in gold, and now it just makes a really easy travel deck, I suppose, pocket deck, bag deck. It's the Guardian Angel Tarot cards by Doreen Virtue, and yes, I absolutely consider this a tarot deck. I know some people won't agree with that, but that's all right. I don't really mind. I've spoken before about this deck. Did I do a review or just a walkthrough of this deck quite a while ago, but I ended up passing it on, and I'm not quite sure why, but lately I think I've just been needing a bit of that love. Nice, simple messages. I really have I haven't been using tarot as much in the last few months. And this is kind of the only deck I've really been using all that much lately. And that is just because I get a clear message, but it's a gentle one. And sometimes I think that's exactly what we need. Another deck people don't always consider a tarot deck, but I certainly do, is the Osho Zen. Now this deck I've had for a long time. I found this deck at Savers many years ago. It's a bit beat up because I've used it a lot over the years. I just think the deck is really, really brilliant. Some of these images are just so intense and evocative, and others are just really simple and speak for themselves. I think it's a really intentional and clever deck. Some of the I think this is making me, I think I'm going to keep this deck out actually. I'm feeling like I want to, having kind of struggled with my tarot lately, maybe I just need to go back to my roots a little. This is a beautiful deck that I got in a trade with the one and only nobody here that I haven't used yet. It came right around when I was just kind of winding down with my tarot use for this year. I don't know, lost a bit of my mojo, I think, towards the end of the year. It's certainly one I want to spend some time with, and it's so interesting and beautiful to me, but I just haven't had the mind space or really the motivation with tarot in general, let alone a new deck that I know I really want to commit some attention to, because I know that that's what it deserves. But I just love cards like this. I know looking at this that there is so much story and experience behind this, and I don't know what that is because I haven't read the guidebook, but because it's so specific and clear, it brings up a lot for me just looking at these sort of images. It's really, really interesting. And just a really unique sort of a deck, I think, too. Really cool one. Next is another deck I got towards the end of the year, also as a gift from the fabulous Tracy. And I fell in love with, like, instantly, like within seconds of opening it up. This one I have actually used a little bit, especially for a deck that I've gotten towards the end of the year, just because it was so easy to use that I didn't have to overthink. I didn't feel like I needed to devote a whole bunch of attention or mind space to it. Not because it doesn't deserve all of those things, but almost just because it doesn't, I don't know. I don't mean to belittle the deck or the artist, but it just was easy. And I think that's because this is so cleverly done, kind of really bringing a meaning down to its simplest form and depicting it in such a simple way. I don't know, I think that takes its own genius. So I don't mean to belittle decks like this at all. That is not my intention. Indeed, it's the opposite. This deck just, I don't know, it just felt like it fit me, I suppose, and that I got it. And so it was just kind of a pleasure to work with right out of the box. And it is one of the few decks that I kind of have still been pulling a card or two every now and then from, just because it's effortless and it's beautiful and it's fun and it makes me smile. And sometimes that's just what we need. And there's plenty of teacups in it, which just about sold me. That was about that was about the end of me when I realized that there was teacups everywhere. I was like, okay, I have a new favorite deck now. This deck is a deck that was really kind of got the community buzzing this year. It's the Naked Heart Tarot. This one I intended to do a review of, and I'm sorry that I haven't done that, but as I said, I just haven't been in the space to do it. I don't know, there's just something, again, there's so much intention and attention to detail, I suppose, put into this deck. And I really respect the creator and everything that she went through with the first edition and bringing out the second, and I just think integrity is really a word that kind of describes what I saw looking at her and what, you know, decisions she made and the way that she responded to the community and everything. And she's created a stunning deck. It was one that I wasn't 100% sure whether it would be for me. And I am leaning towards it possibly being for me, but I'm still not 100% sure, and that's just because I've spoken about before how, like, often animal-based decks don't really do it for me. But the guidebook for this deck I think is brilliant. And I love how it explains all the different details and everything in the cards. And even though it is very based on animal symbolism, you know, cards like this, you can still get a sense of what's going on, whether you know what the panda is supposed to mean or whatever. Like, I think just the animals and the colors and their body postures, their body language, you know, that's enough to go on. And cards like this, I love that. I think it's really cool. And the dolphins, they're adorable. So it's a really beautiful deck, and I am sorry that I haven't done a review or anything on it yet. This is the cutest little deck in the world. It is the Little Monsters Tarot. Another deck I got in a trade with nobody here. And it's not a deck I feel like I need to use or even want to use very often. But the times that I have, it's been really kind of like self-love, self-healing work that's kind of come up, which has been really interesting. The Little Monsters Tarot, or the Mons Tarot, it shares the name with another one of, probably one of my favorite decks ever. But it has a completely different feel. It's almost somber. It's very quiet, at the very least, I would say. I did actually have a little bit of trouble kind of connecting with this deck at first, just because I felt like it was quiet. Reminds me of like a scary, creepy Pikachu. I love this. So for me, it took a bit of work to get reading with this deck, not because it's complicated. In fact, I think the symbolism's quite simple, but and effective. It just didn't really. It spoke in a very soft voice. I had to kind of entice it out, And when I did, I don't know, it was just like these gentle little pushes towards self-love and awareness and acceptance, and those sort of messages and lessons were coming up a lot with it, which I thought was really interesting. Next we have an old favorite of mine. It's the Spiral Tarot. This I still maintain is one of the most underrated decks, and I wish they would re-release this without this stupid border, because I feel like this puts a lot of people off, and I don't blame them. But I've said before, and I'll say it again, that I think if this appeals to you at all, just do your best to get past the border, because it's a brilliant deck. There's so much here. It brings up the difficult experiences and emotions in a way that can be confronting, but also feels validating, and like you're being seen, like it's holding space and honoring the challenges as opposed to forecasting them. I don't know if that makes sense. And there's a lot of movement in this too, which I just love, and it's a really, really beautiful deck, a very well thought out deck, a lot of intention and symbolism and mythology has gone into creating this deck, and ultimately I just think it's a really, really powerful, brilliant one that, I don't know, a lot of you are sleeping on. It's a good one, I promise. It's a great one. The Tarot Muha. This is just, I don't know, another one that's, I feel like, a little bit underrated, I suppose, in many ways. There's something about it that is just such a good reader. This card's a little bit creepy, but also really powerful. But I've just found it's one of those decks that, you know, if you ask me what decks I love, I probably this wouldn't even come to mind. But simultaneously, it's one that I use a lot. It's just been one that's just really easy to read. I found it really great for relationship style readings. I think it's just a solid reader in my experience. I really, really enjoy it a lot more than I thought I was going to. I got this secondhand and I love it. I do, like, not in this sort of way that, you know, I think of tarot and I think of all my favorite decks. It's just a bit of a staple, even if it does have a few creepy little faces in it. But ultimately, I just think it's, I don't know, it's just a solid little deck. The Ophidia Rosa Tarot. This is a pretty unique one for me, personally, in my collection. It's quite unlike most of what I have and most of what I'm normally drawn to. Backing's really beautiful. I'm still not entirely sure what I think of it, but I have had some really powerful experiences with it. So I don't really have a lot that I can say about this deck, because my experience with it, you know, just pulling cards and trying to have a reading of like provide an answer to something, hasn't been very good, to be perfectly honest. But just kind of shuffling the cards and seeing what comes up, for me personally, in a more kind of sacred, mindful, open, send me a message sort of a way, has been really, really moving. And because of that, you know, I don't really have words for those very, very specific, you know, personal experience. Next is an old favorite of mine, Fantastic Menagerie by Bobba Studios. This isn't just a deck that I like, or that a deck that I think is pretty or interesting or cool because it's out of print. Like, it's legitimately one of my favorite decks and one of the decks that I read with the most. I absolutely adore it. It would be very, very, like, it's absolutely, there's no question that it's in my top 5 favorite decks. I love this deck so much. I think it's so funny and so clever. It's just satire in a deck, and I think it's brilliant. And it just, I just feel like I've said everything that needs to be said about this deck, to the point where I'm starting to just sound like a bit of a cliche, repeating myself. But it's so beautiful in some of these images, but it's also unsettling and a little bit, it's surreal and strange, and I just think it's wonderful. I just think it's one of the most wonderful decks I have ever had the pleasure of working with. Tarot of the White Cats. This is a fun deck. I haven't read with this one. It's one of the newer decks. I think it is the newest deck in my collection, actually. Tarot decks, anyway. This one my mum got me. I've spoken before about how when my mum goes away on trips, she will very often pick up a deck for me. And she knows that I have, you know, a decent sized collection. And so she's kind of given up. She's decided that for her, she thinks it's more interesting and more fun and less stress for her to just pick the strangest, quirkiest, most interesting and different sort of a deck that she can find. When she pulled this out, I just couldn't stop laughing, and we spent we were at a cafe and we spent the afternoon kind of playing around with it and looking at it and just laughing. And it is very literally the Rider-Waite-Smith, even with like the same bodies, just with cat heads on them and tails, and it's just the funniest little thing. And like, oh, these mice, I just can't get over it. It just makes me laugh. I just think it's such a silly little thing that, yeah, I never would have gotten for myself. And that's what makes it such a cool present. And I don't know if I'll have this forever, but for now it brings me a lot of joy because I think it's freaking hilarious. And I'm not really a cat person, I'm much more of a dog person, which makes the Fool even funnier. The fact that the Fool is the dog. The one and only dog. So this is just a really fun, playful little deck that just makes me smile. Thanks, Mum. Now we go to the Fountain Tarot, which this edition is the original self-published edition, actually. And this is one of my favorite backings ever. I don't read with this deck as much as I used to, but when I first got it, the year that I got it, this was one of my most used decks. And I definitely do find myself reading more for other people with this deck these days. Just because I think it's basically, for me, the Rider-Waite-Smith, but cooler. The Rider-Waite-Smith already feels pretty neutral, but I think sometimes it can be pretty hard-hitting. This feels like the Rider-Waite-Smith, but just more detached and more cool, calm, collected, more impartial. Like, it just, I don't know, there's something really quite refreshing and interesting about having a deck that can do that. I think it's really beautiful. I love like some of these angles and shapes that they've kind of managed to portray. And I do think that this is kind of like a modern classic, I suppose. Next up we have what was possibly and probably my most used deck of 2018. It's a Sasuraibito. I haven't used it a lot recently, partly just because I haven't been using a lot of tarot, but I fell head over heels in love with this deck when it arrived, and it was one that I nearly didn't get. So that kind of really surprised me. And I've done a review of it, and I've spoken about, you know, how much I love this card, for example. I think it's absolutely brilliant. I spoke a lot about this deck this year. It showed up a lot in my favorites videos. As I said, I did a pretty extensive review. So I don't want to repeat myself too much, but suffice it to say, I think this deck is brilliant. I mean, it's pretty and it's simple and it's cute, but I also think it's just really, really, really cleverly done. I think it's such an easy deck to read with and an absolute joy to read with. I really like the little guidebook too. I think it's written in a really kind of fun, informal way, but also a really personal one that's always just been really on point for me. And I love cards like this. Like, just the simplicity of that, I think, is so effective. Another deck that was a pretty big one for me this year, although it was towards the end of the year, is the Textured Tarot. This is a gorgeous deck, and another one I fell in love with. And so I was a little apprehensive, especially because, you know, with postage and everything, this is not a cheap deck. But, you know, I have her 3 Oracle decks, so I figured I just had to give this a go. And I'm so glad I did, because yes, it's an investment. Yes, it is a little bit different to her Oracle decks, but she put just as much intention and attention into this deck as she did with the Oracle decks. And it's just such a cool take on the tarot system. And it's so beautiful and fresh and unique, but it's also just a really easy deck to read with. There's plenty here to kind of really sink your teeth into, but there's also a lot of room for you to I don't know, for your own self and experience to step into the cards as well. The Hezicos Tarot is one of those decks, probably if I counted up all the times I've used tarot ever since I started using tarot, this would be somewhere in the top 5 or 10 for decks that I've used the most in my lifetime. I don't know, that's a hard thing to say, but it's definitely a deck that I used a lot when I got, but I've also used pretty consistently since. That has started slipping only since I got the Little Monsters Tarot, the Mons Tarot, because I feel like in many ways they are similar. But I mean, they still are quite different. And I mean, this deck just holds a special place in my heart because of how much time I've spent with it and how much it meant to me. And I have done a review on it. Done a review on a lot of these decks, or unboxings as well. Just a really colourful, pretty little deck, and a little corgi. A fey world, a strange little world. Okay, our next one is the Dark Days Tarot, which is a pretty new deck to me. I did an unboxing of, which I actually published yesterday. Finally, even though it's a pretty old video from my perspective. And my first impression of that deck was that I just was kind of floored by how much I liked it. And obviously, as I've said multiple times, I haven't been using tarot or reading as much as perhaps I would like to, or certainly as much as I usually do. But this is one of those decks that I have been using a little bit. And it's been a pleasure. It's been an absolute delight. I've really, really enjoyed it. I love the imagery. It really just kind of speaks to me, as cliche and corny as that sounds, it does. I just pull some cards and I just, you know, the messages flow. But additionally to that, I really enjoy the guidebook for those kind of different directional meanings, even though I don't read with the different directions, like the reversed or whatever. I do kind of enjoy seeing those. I just see them as different sides of the same coin, if a coin had 4 sides. So I find that interesting to add a bit of nuance to the message. It's really interesting. Like, it's very Rider-Waite-Smith in its meanings, but there's just a lot going on that really kind of adds a unique sort of a flavour into my tarot world, which I really appreciate and enjoy. Next we have an old favourite of mine that I know a lot of people are now finally able to get. And it's been really interesting seeing people have their own experiences and reactions to the deck. And it's funny, I felt a little protective of it. And so when people started saying that they were waiting for it in the mail or whatever, I kind of was like, just, you better appreciate my deck, guys. It's kind of how I felt, which I know is silly. I know that's irrational. It's not my deck. It's Elizabeth Josephine Gill's. Thank you to her. So I was a bit nervous, but it seems like at least quite a few people have responded really well to it, which makes me really happy. I'm glad other people are experiencing it, having the opportunity to experience it, because I genuinely think that it's, I mean, I'm totally biased, but I think it's one of the greatest decks ever. So I'm so happy that other people get the opportunity to experience it for themselves, because I think it has a lot to offer. But I think having it out in the world also taught me a lot about how, or just reminded me of how differently we all experience and love decks. Next is another deck that is coming back out, and I'm really genuinely glad that this one is, because, I mean, the Gill Tarot I think is brilliant and I love. The Next World Tarot I think is brilliant and I love it, but I also just think it's really important. Oh God, I haven't pulled this deck out for a little while because I haven't been using my cards very much, but this just hits me. There's just something so incredibly empowering and uplifting and radically loving about this deck. I just think when I first saw this deck online and I saw the concept, I thought this was going to be a really hard hitting deck, you know, like a fuck the system, change the world sort of deck, and it is, but it's also not. It's got really, it's got hard edges, but a really, really soft, nurturing core. And that's the essence of the deck. Like, I knew it was going to be a lot about, you know, intersectional human rights, but I think I just wasn't aware of how human this deck was going to be. I don't know if I'm making any sense, and I hope I'm not coming across wrong. But basically I knew that this deck was going to be radical and powerful and all of those things, but I didn't know it was also going to be beautiful and sensual and touching. But it is all of those things and so much more. I just think this is just one of those decks. It's another one that I'm genuinely trying not to cry right now. And I think I need to keep it out as well. This deck helped me so much at the beginning of this year, and it's exciting that it's coming back out into the world. I always intended to do a review, but this is what happens when I try and talk about it. I get emotional. I just think it's brilliant. Another deck that seems to have a bit of a re-release is the Liminal Tarot. Now this was a limited edition of only 200, and it was the most expensive deck I've ever bought. But it's just a really special one. I honestly don't use it as much as I used to. For a long time, my kind of three big decks were the Gill Tarot, the Fantastic Menagerie, and the Liminal. And of those three, the Fantastic Menagerie really is the only one that I use consistently. The Gill Tarot obviously is still a really important deck to me, and one that I use for myself. The Fantastic Menagerie I could just use any day, every day. But the Liminal I still use occasionally, but nowhere near as much as I used to, and I still love it. I love like the balloons and the colours and I think it's beautiful. I don't know what it is why I don't go to it more often, but it's a really special deck. I love this imagery. Okay, we're nearing the home stretch. Thanks for sticking with me. This is the Monstarot Tarot. This has become a deck that I have used a lot. This would be another one that's probably up there with my most used decks of the past year. I adore this deck. This was another one that was a bit of a surprise for me. I've done a review and I explain it's a pretty thorough review for what is essentially a Rider-Waite-Smith knockoff, but with adorable alien-y monster creatures. For how Rider-Waite-Smith this deck is, I was surprised how much I got out of it, how much new stuff I got from it. I just think this deck is absolutely brilliant. I love it to pieces. I think it's so fun. Of my kind of colourful Rider-Waite-Smith-ish decks, like the Hezicos and the Circo, this has been the one that I've used the most. Those other decks are wonderful and I love them to pieces, but this one just, there's something about this that just tickles my fancy in just the right way, and that is so easy to read with, but that I get so much from. The World Spirit Tarot. This is a classic. And actually this is another deck that kind of has been nudged off my list. Not like, I still love it, but this was one of my most used decks of last year, of 2017. But since I got the Next World Tarot, I don't use this one as much. But there just must be something about the essence of this deck that is what I'm searching for when I used to go to this deck, that is similar to the one in the Next World. And I think that has a lot to do with that radical self-love. Like there's a humanity, a spirit kind of flowing through this deck that I think the Next World really portrays well as well. This one is just a lot more Rider-Waite-Smith. So I have still used it this year, just not as much as I did the year before. This next deck is the Efflorescent Tarot, which is by the same creator who did, or creators I think, who did the Little Monsters Tarot. This is another one of those decks that I'd kind of like the Clover Tarot, where I'd wanted it for a long time, but it kept going on and off my list, and partly because it was like the shipping was just as much as the deck, and that's always hard to stomach. But this is just such a lovely little deck. The colours, you can, or you used to be able to get this in a black and white version, but I quite liked the colour. But there's something quite sombre about it as well, which I think I said about the Little Monsters, didn't I? There's a bit of a moodiness about this artwork, especially when a lot of my decks kind of err on the cheery side, like the Little Monsters and the, or like the Mons Tarot, pardon me, and the Hezicos and the Circo. Like they have their light and their shadow, but you know, their colours and their faces and everything, they're quite peppy, I suppose. This deck's kind of almost the opposite, which is interesting. The artwork's really cool though, I like it a lot. Okay, we are nearing the end. Here we have the Dreams of Gaia Tarot, which was a whole thing for me. It's starting to feel like this deck might come out again soon. It is technically summer, but it doesn't feel like summer yet. And this to me is definitely a high summer sort of a deck. I know this isn't like, the creator is obviously Australian. I know that a lot of this imagery isn't Australian specific, but something just really rings true for me with the Australian summer and the intensity and destruction, rebirth that happens with the Australian summer and this deck, which I really like. I've used this deck for some very, very powerful readings. This card, it's intense and beautiful. And I have spoken about this deck quite a lot on and off over the past couple of years since it came out. And one of my more recent acquisitions, I should probably try and get this open before I start talking, is the Gaian Tarot. And this is the old Llewellyn edition, which again I was very, very specifically after. Of all the editions that there has been, this is the one I wanted. Now, this is fairly new to me. I got it just as I was kind of going into my little, I don't want to call it a slump, because it also feels like I needed it. Like it's not just like I can't get into tarot. It's also kind of like I needed some downtime. So I'm not sure what to call it, but ever since I've been on this little break of mine, I got this kind of just as that was happening, just before. So I haven't worked with it yet, but it's such a beautiful deck. And I'm so very glad to have it. When I unboxed it, I kind of really started to appreciate why this deck has such a strong following and why it's beloved by so many people so strongly and has been for so long. Because it's absolutely stunning and it just feels good. I don't really know how else to explain that. It's a lovely little deck, and one I'm very glad to have. So that is all my decks. I hope you guys enjoyed. For those of you that stuck through this, thank you. I'll leave all of the names and everything of all of these decks in the description. So if you missed out on a name, check the description. And I will talk to you all again soon. Hopefully I'll be back with my Oracle deck collection soon. I'm not sure when. My throat's a bit sore after all that talking, so it might have to be a few days. But anyway, I'll talk to you then. So much love, guys. Bye.